The council hall smelled of candle wax, resin burning in the wall torches, and the red wine that servants had been carrying since sundown. It was the night of the clan gathering, the most important of the year, when the alphas of every region assembled beneath the stone roof of Veldmore's great hall to renew alliances, settle disputes, and display strength. Lottie knew exactly what that night meant for her. She had spent 3 weeks sewing the dress with Petra's help. Petra was her only real friend among the servants, a small woman with rust-colored hair and quick fingers whose loyalty was worth more than any noble title. The dress was the color of deep night, nearly black, with modest embroidery along the hem that Petra had stitched by hand, using silver thread she had been saving for months. It was not a noblewoman's dress, but it was the finest thing Lottie had ever worn. "You look like an alpha's daughter," Petra had said when Lottie studied herself in the polished bronze mirror of the small room they shared behind the kitchens. Lottie had laughed quietly, not quite believing it. She was nobody's daughter. A servant of Veldmore since she was 16, assigned to carry trays during banquets and scrub the stone corridors on cold mornings. 23 years of life, most of them invisible. But Corvin had promised. Corvin Ashdale, son of the Alpha of the Grafen Pack, had promised. 3 moons ago, on a guard night when she brought warm wine to the sentinels, and he looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, he said that at the clan gathering he would present her before everyone, that he would choose her, that it didn't matter what his family thought, that what he felt for her was stronger than any tradition. Lottie had kept those words inside her chest like embers. Now, standing near the eastern stone column, holding a tray of wine-filled cups, she searched for Corvin's face in the crowd. The hall was full, dozens of alphas and their advisors, high-born women in gold-embroidered gowns, warriors in heavy cloaks bearing pack insignias on their shoulders. Torches along the tall walls cast uneven golden light across everything. The resin smoke rose slowly toward the vaulted ceiling. She found Corvin. He was standing near the center of the hall, smiling. Beside him was a woman with dark hair pinned in elaborate braids, pale skin, and green eyes. She wore an amber necklace that Lottie had never seen before. The kind of necklace a man gives to a woman he has chosen. The kind of necklace Corvin had once described as a pack promise. Lottie felt the impact before she fully understood what she was seeing. Her chest tightened. Her fingers steadied the tray by instinct. Corvin turned his head. He saw Lottie. For a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. It was not remorse. It was discomfort. The kind of discomfort of a man who sees a problem he would have preferred to avoid. He looked away. He simply looked away, the way a person turns their face to avoid stepping in a puddle. The advisor beside Corvin said something in a low voice, and Corvin responded with a smile, tilting his head toward the dark-haired woman, who held his arm with the ease of someone who had been doing it for many weeks. Petra appeared beside Lottie from nowhere, as she always did in the wrong and right moments at the same time. "You saw," Petra said. It was not a question. "Yes," Lottie answered. "Lottie, I'm fine." She was not, but she would be. She had to be, because there were 70 people in that hall, and she was still holding a tray and wearing a dress that had cost 3 weeks of work. And the one thing she refused to do was cry where anyone could see her. She began to move. She served the cups calmly. She smiled at the advisors who asked for more wine. She crossed the hall with measured steps, the tray steady, her chin in the right place. Inside, there was a kind of sharp silence, like the cold that seeps under a door. That was when Corvin moved toward her. She thought for one foolish second that he was going to explain, to apologize, to say something that made sense. "Lottie," he said quietly, stepping close enough not to be heard by others. "You understand how things work. My family has alliances to maintain. My father chose Celine. It's a union between packs. You made a promise," she said. Her voice came out calm. That surprised her. "I know what I said. But you are a servant, Lottie." He said it with a gentleness that was worse than anger. This was never truly possible. I assumed you understood that. She looked at him for a long moment. You can go back to your bride, she replied. Corvin blinked, slightly unsettled by her stillness. Then he turned on his heel and walked back toward the center of the hall. Lottie stood still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she began walking toward the side exit, the door that opened into the service corridor, where servants passed with trays, and where no one of importance ever paid attention. She was not going to cry in the service corridor. She was going to leave, turn the corner, reach the stone courtyard at the back, sit on the wooden bench beneath the old oak near the stable, and then let her chest release whatever it needed to release. But fate, as Petra always said, was inconvenient. She had just passed the dark marble column near the side entrance when she nearly collided with a group of men coming through the same corridor. 3 men. No, 4. The 4th came 1 step behind, and he was the one Lottie noticed first, because there was something in the way he moved that pulled attention before any detail became clear. Tall. Dark cloak with no visible insignia, but the fabric was of a weight and quality she had only seen on alphas of very old bloodlines. Dark hair slightly damp, as though he had arrived from outside in the thin rain falling over Veldmore that night. An expression that was not exactly closed, but contained. The kind of containment that does not come from shyness, but from a strength so settled it has nothing left to prove. The other 3 were loud by comparison. Well now, said the first, a broad-shouldered man with an amused expression, stepping aside to avoid Lottie's tray. Is there a servant in the wrong corridor, or are we the ones in the wrong corridor? You're in the service corridor, Lottie said. The main entrance is through the north wing. Look at that, said the second, taller, with a crooked smile and pale eyes. She knows where things are. Useful. Rail, said the man in the dark cloak. A single word. Calm. The second man, Rail, closed his smile immediately, not with fear, but with the automatic respect of someone who obeys a person who does not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. The man in the dark cloak looked at Lottie. She was used to being looked at without being seen. It was the natural state of servants in halls like that one. But this gaze was different. It was not the look of someone examining an obstacle in his path. It was the look of someone genuinely paying attention. You serve in this hall, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she answered. How long? She did not understand why that mattered. 7 years. He was quiet for a moment. There was something in the way he stood still that did not feel like hesitation. It felt like assessment, like someone reading a document carefully before signing it. What is your name? Lottie. The name came without a surname, because she had none worth mentioning in that corridor, among those men. The man tilted his head slightly in a gesture she could not quite read. Sebastian, he said. And the hall, on the other side of the heavy wooden door, remained loud and indifferent, while the Alpha King of Veldmore stood in the service corridor, looking at a servant in a midnight-colored dress, as though she were the most interesting thing he had encountered in a very long time. Lottie had served enough powerful men to know the difference between a man who looked at a woman and a man who looked at a woman. Most men in that hall looked through her. She was a tray, a cup, a pair of hands that appeared and disappeared. Useful furniture. The ones who did look at her directly usually wanted something she was not going to give, and she had learned years ago exactly which kind of stillness discouraged that without causing a scene. Sebastian was neither of those things. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. Not possession. Not dismissal. Something in between that she did not have a word for. We'll enter through the north wing, he said, finally, to the men behind him. His voice was even. Not loud. The kind of voice that expected to be heard the first time, and generally was. The broad-shouldered one, who had spoken first, glanced between Sebastian and Lottie with an expression of open curiosity. He had the look of someone who found most situations entertaining. "Of course," he said, drawing the words out slightly. "The North Wing, absolutely." "Dane," Sebastian said. "Moving," Dane replied, without losing the entertained expression. The four of them turned back down the corridor. Sebastian was the last to turn. He looked at Lottie once more before he did, briefly, and then he was gone around the corner, the sound of their boots fading against the stone floor. Lottie stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she continued toward the side door, pushed it open, and stepped into the cold night air of the back courtyard. The rain had softened to a mist. The old oak was dark against the sky, its branches heavy with early spring leaves that caught the light from the torches along the courtyard wall. She sat on the wooden bench, set the empty tray beside her feet, and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment. She did not cry. She had told herself she would when she got here, but now that she was sitting in the cold with the mist settling on her hair and the sounds of the banquet muffled behind thick stone walls, the tears did not come. What came instead was something quieter and more difficult, the slow understanding that she had believed something she should not have believed. Not because she was foolish, because she had wanted it to be true, and wanting something badly enough can make the mind build a very convincing architecture around it. Corvin had been comfortable with her. Kind, even. She understood now that comfortable and kind were not the same as chosen. The door behind her opened. She turned, expecting Petra. It was not Petra. It was Dane, the broad-shouldered man, who came through the door with the expression of someone who had been sent on an errand he was genuinely curious about. He was carrying 2 cups of wine, which struck her as odd. "The north entrance was crowded," he said, by way of explanation that explained nothing. "I see," she said. He extended one of the cups toward her. She looked at it. "I'm working," she said. "Your tray is on the ground," he pointed out. She looked at the tray by her feet. He was not wrong. She took the cup. He sat on the low stone wall across from the bench, which was not an invitation she had offered, but he settled into it with the ease of a man who was comfortable in most spaces and did not particularly require permission. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps a handful of years older than her, with a broad jaw and the kind of easy physicality that belonged to someone who had trained hard since childhood. "You're from Grey Wolf," she said. She had noticed the pack insignia partially visible at the collar of his cloak when the torchlight hit it at the right angle. "Good eye," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. "Most people can't place that insignia outside formal presentations." "I've served in this hall for 7 years," she said. "You learn the markings. What else do you learn?" She looked at him. Who to trust and who to avoid. He smiled at that, not offended. "And which am I?" "I haven't decided yet." He laughed, a real laugh, short and unguarded. "Fair." He drank from his cup. "The man who looked away from you in there. Who is he?" Lottie felt something still in her chest. "No one. He made you come out here alone in the rain." "The rain stopped," she said, "and I came out here alone because I chose to." Dane studied her for a moment with the particular attention of someone reassessing an assumption. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more. Undone." She looked at him steadily. "I am undone," she said. "I'm just not doing it in front of an audience." He was quiet for a moment, and the quality of the quiet was different from the previous ones. Less testing. "Sebastian noticed you," he said then. Straightforward, the way someone puts a piece of information on a table to see what the other person does with it. Lottie said nothing. "That's not a common thing," Dane continued. "He doesn't notice people easily. Or rather, he notices everything, but most things don't hold his attention past the first second. You held it past the first second." "I nearly knocked him over with a tray," she said. "That's happened before." It didn't produce the same result. He finished his wine. I'm telling you because I think you should know. Not because I'm trying to manage you or move you in a particular direction. Sebastian would skin me for even having this conversation. Then why are you having it? He stood, setting the empty cup on the wall beside him. Because you sat out here alone in the rain after someone made you feel like you were worth less than you are. And it seemed like the kind of night where someone should say something honest to you. He went back through the door without waiting for her answer. Lottie sat with the cup of wine in both hands, the mist cool on her face, and thought about what honest meant coming from a man she had known for 8 minutes. She went back inside 20 minutes later. The banquet was still in full motion, the noise of it rolling toward her the moment she pushed open the service door. She picked up a fresh tray from the kitchen corridor, nodded at the cook who gave her a questioning look, and moved back into the hall. She saw Sebastian almost immediately. He was standing near the far end of the main table. Beside 2 senior alphas she recognized as the heads of the Stone Marrow and Duskfall packs. He was listening to them speak. Not performing listening, actually listening, with the particular stillness of someone who processes before responding. He did not gesture much. When he spoke, the 2 senior alphas leaned in slightly, unconsciously, the way people lean toward things that carry weight. He did not look in her direction. She moved through the hall, served 3 tables, collected empty cups, exchanged a pressed look with Petra that communicated everything and nothing at once. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. A new group entered. 4 men, road-worn, cloaks still carrying the dust of travel. They moved differently from the guests already inside. Less ceremony, more purpose. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the hall. Small, but Lottie had spent 7 years reading rooms, and she felt it the way she felt a change in the draft from a window. The new men's eyes moved across the hall in a particular pattern. Not the pattern of guests looking for familiar faces. The pattern of men looking for one specific thing. One of them locked eyes with another across the room, a brief glance, the kind that confirms a position. Lottie had seen that look exactly once before, 6 years ago, when a dispute between 2 minor packs turned violent in this very hall before anyone understood what was happening. Her chest went very still. Her eyes moved to Sebastian without deciding to. He was still at the far end of the table. His back was partially turned. The 2 senior alphas were talking. He was not watching the door. The road-worn men had separated, moving slowly, naturally, as though simply finding seats. One of them reached into his cloak. Lottie was already moving. She did not think. That was the part she would struggle to explain later, when people asked. There was no moment of decision, no calculation, no weighing of consequences. There was only the small metallic sound she heard beneath the noise of the hall, the soft, precise click of a mechanism being readied, a sound she recognized from years of carrying trays past armed sentinels in dark corridors, a sound that did not belong inside a banquet. Her body moved before her mind finished the sentence. She crossed the distance between herself and Sebastian in 7 steps, dropping the tray without looking at it, the cups hitting the stone floor with a crash that turned heads, and she stepped directly in front of him with both arms out, her back to his chest, facing the direction the sound had come from. "Keep still," she said. It was not loud. It was not a scream. It was the voice she used when something needed to stop immediately, and there was no time for explanation. For exactly 1 second, nobody in the hall understood what was happening. Then Sebastian's hand closed around her arm, not pulling her away, but firm, and she felt him go very still behind her in the way that a man goes still when his body is assessing a situation faster than language allows. The man near the eastern column had a short crossbow, partially concealed beneath his cloak, leveled in the direction where Sebastian had been standing a moment before. He had not yet fired. Her sudden movement had disrupted his angle and drawn the attention of the room. Then, everything happened at once. Dane was moving from the left side of the hall before she registered that he had been watching. The 3rd member of Sebastian's group, a lean man with sharp features she had not properly seen in the corridor, came from the right. Two of Veldmore's hall guards, stationed near the main doors, were already pushing through the crowd. The man with the crossbow made a decision. He raised the weapon, adjusting for the new angle. Sebastian moved. He stepped around Lottie with a speed that she felt more than saw, one hand briefly pressing her back and to the side in a motion that was not rough, but was completely decisive. And then he was no longer behind her. She turned. The crossbow was already on the floor. She did not fully see how it got there. What she saw was Sebastian standing over the man who had been holding it, one hand gripping the front of the man's cloak, and the man making no attempt whatsoever to move, which said more about Sebastian than any title could have. The hall had gone silent. The second road-worn man was being held against the wall by Dane, who had the relaxed and slightly bored expression of someone performing a task well below his capacity. The other two were surrounded by guards. It lasted perhaps 40 seconds from the moment Lottie dropped her tray. Sebastian said something to the man he was holding, very quietly, and the man's face went the color of old ash. Then Sebastian released him, straightened, and turned. He looked at Lottie. The hall was still completely silent. 70 people were watching. Lottie became aware, in a distant way, that she was standing in the middle of the great hall in her handmade dress with an empty tray somewhere on the floor behind her, and the Alpha King of Veldmore looking directly at her in front of everyone. She became aware of something else, too. Corvin was standing 12 feet away. He had a clear view of everything that had just happened. His face held an expression she had never seen on him before and could not quite name. Sebastian crossed the distance between himself and Lottie in 4 unhurried steps. He stopped in front of her. Up close, in the full torchlight of the hall, rather than the dim service corridor, she could see him properly for the first time. The structure of his face was angular and composed, the kind of face that had learned stillness as a discipline, rather than a mood. There was a faint scar along his jaw, old and thin. His eyes were a dark gray that looked nearly black in the low light. He studied her face for a moment. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. "You moved before the guards," he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation with weight behind it. "I heard the mechanism," she said. "A crossbow being readied has a specific sound. I've heard it enough times in this hall. Most people who hear that sound in a crowded room run away from it. Running away would have given him the angle back," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he had been considering. "What is your name?" he said. He had asked in the corridor, she remembered. He was asking again here, in front of everyone, and the repetition meant something different this time. "Lottie," she said. And then, because something in the moment seemed to require it, Lottie Vane. She had not used that name in years. It had belonged to her mother, a woman who had left when Lottie was 4 and left nothing behind except that name and a faint memory of dark hair. It was not a noble name. It was not a pack name. But it was hers, and she said it steadily. Sebastian held her gaze for another moment. Then he turned to address the hall. "The threat is contained," he said, in a voice that carried without effort to every corner of the room. "The men will be held for questioning. The gathering will continue." The hall exhaled. Conversation began again, slowly, cautiously, the way it does after something alarming has been replaced by the authority of someone people trust to handle alarming things. Petra appeared at Lottie's elbow from the direction of the kitchen corridor, slightly breathless, her eyes very wide. "I leave you alone for 20 minutes, she whispered. "I know," Lottie said. "You stepped in front of the Alpha King." "I know." "With a serving tray." "I dropped the tray," Lottie said. Petra stared at her for a long moment. Then she pressed both hands over her mouth and made a sound that was equal parts terror and laughter. The lean man with sharp features, the third member of Sebastian's group, appeared beside them. He was slightly older than Dane, with the careful eyes of someone whose primary function was observation, and whose secondary function was making sure everyone else's primary functions were running correctly. "The Alpha King requests that you remain in the hall this evening," he said to Lottie. "Not as a servant, as a guest." Lottie looked at him. "I don't have a guest's place at any table." "You do now," he said, with the precise tone of someone relaying a fact rather than offering an opinion. Petra made the sound again. Lottie looked across the hall. Sebastian was speaking with the two senior alphas again, unhurried, as though the last 5 minutes had been a minor interruption, but as if he felt her gaze. He looked up briefly, met her eyes, and then returned his attention to the men in front of him. It was a very small look. It lasted less than a second. Lottie felt it for considerably longer. She sat at the table the lean man indicated, near the east wall, slightly apart from the main configuration of the banquet. Petra sat beside her, because Petra was not about to be moved by any force available in that hall, and the lean man seemed to calculate that removing her would require more effort than it was worth. From her new position, Lottie had a clear view of the hall. She could see Corvin. He was still standing where he had been. The woman with the amber necklace was speaking to him, but he was not fully listening. He was looking toward the east wall. Lottie did not look back at him. She looked instead at the stone walls of the hall she had cleaned for 7 years, the banners of the Alcatayas hanging from the vaulted ceiling, the torchlight moving across everything, and she thought about how a room could look completely different depending on where you were sitting in it. From behind a tray, the great hall of Veldmore was a place she moved through carefully, staying near the edges, making herself small. From this chair, with the noise of the banquet around her and the weight of the last hour settling into her bones, it looked like a place she had always had the right to be inside of. She was not sure what to do with that thought yet, but she kept it. The questioning of the 4 men took place in the lower chamber beneath the great hall, a room Lottie knew only from the outside, having passed its iron door countless times while carrying linens to the storage rooms nearby. She had always noted the thickness of that door, and never wanted to know what it was designed to muffle. She learned the broad shape of what happened there the following morning, not from Sebastian but from Dane, who appeared in the kitchen courtyard while she was drawing water from the well, and leaned against the stone wall with the ease of a man with nowhere more pressing to be. "They were hired," he said, without preamble. 2 from outside the region. 2 from inside, which is the part that will keep Sebastian occupied for the next several days. Lottie set the water bucket down. Someone inside Veldmore hired men to kill him at the gathering. During the gathering, Dane corrected, as though the timing was the relevant detail. Public, loud room, multiple witnesses, designed to look like a spontaneous act from a dissatisfied pack member, harder to trace back. Did they say who sent them? The 2 from outside talked. The 2 from inside. He paused briefly, chose not to. She understood what that pause contained. She did not ask further. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you're involved now, whether you plan to be or not," he said. "When you stepped in front of Sebastian in that hall, 70 people saw it. By this morning it will be the version of the story traveling between every pack representative who attended the gathering. By the end of the week it will have reached packs who weren't here." Lottie picked up the water bucket. "I heard a sound and I moved. It wasn't a political act." "It never is, with the ones that matter," Dane said. He pushed off the wall. "Sebastian wants to speak with you this morning, the east courtyard when you're finished here." He walked back toward the main building without waiting for her response, which she was beginning to understand was simply how members of Sebastian's circle communicated. Information delivered, expectation established, outcome assumed. She finished her morning tasks, told Petra where she was going, endured Petra's expression, and went to the east courtyard. It was a smaller space than the back courtyard where she had sat the night before, enclosed on 3 sides by the older section of the castle, with a stone bench along the inner wall and a bare trellis that would carry climbing roses in another few weeks. The morning was cold and clear, the mist from the night before burned off by a pale sun. Sebastian was already there. He was standing near the trellis, not sitting, reading something on a folded piece of paper that he put away when she came through the archway. He was dressed more plainly than the night before. A dark tunic, no ceremonial cloak, which somehow made him look more rather than less like himself. "Lottie Vane," he said. "You remembered the surname," she said. "I remember things that seem worth remembering," he said. "Not a flattery. A statement of fact." She stopped a few feet from him. In the morning light, she could see the details that the torchlight had suggested the night before. The scar along his jaw was older than she had thought, probably from early training. His hands, resting at his sides, were the hands of someone who had fought with them regularly and for a long time. "Dane said you wanted to speak with me," she said. "I do." He looked at her steadily. "I want to understand what you heard." "A crossbow mechanism. The click when the draw is locked and the bolt is seated." "You identified that in a full banquet hall." "It cut through the other sounds," she said. "I don't know how to explain it better than that. It was wrong. The sound was wrong for the room." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been able to do that?" "Do what?" "Isolate sounds that way." She thought about it. "Always. I assumed everyone could. It took me a few years to understand they couldn't." Sebastian looked at her with an expression she was beginning to associate with him, not unreadable exactly, but deliberate. He was choosing what to show. "I want to ask you something directly," he said. "And I want a direct answer." "All right. Why were you leaving the hall last night?" "Before the corridor. You were heading for the side exit. You looked like someone who had just decided something." The question landed in a way she had not expected. Not because it was intrusive, but because he had noticed the thing nobody else had noticed. Not what happened in the corridor, not the crossbow, but the moment before all of it. The quiet moment of a woman walking toward a door with her chin up and her chest in pieces. She looked at him for a moment. "Someone made me a promise," she said. "He didn't keep it. I was going outside to manage the consequences of having believed him." "Corvin Ashdale," Sebastian said. She went still. "You know who he is." "I know who everyone in that hall is," he said. "I knew who you were before you told me your name. You asked me anyway. I wanted to hear how you said it." Lottie absorbed that. The morning was quiet around them. A bird somewhere in the trellis, the distant sound of the castle beginning its daily work. "What did you want to speak to me about?" she said. "Beyond the crossbow." Sebastian moved to the stone bench and sat, not in a way that suggested he needed to rest, but in a way that shifted the conversation from formal to considered. He gestured briefly to the other end of the bench. She sat. "Veldmore has a position," he said. "It has existed for many years, but has not been filled properly in a long time. Someone responsible for the security of the inner halls during gatherings and formal events. Not a guard. Guards watch doors and stand at posts. This position requires someone who moves through the interior of a room, the way water moves, without drawing attention, but present everywhere. Someone who reads a room not by its obvious signals, but by the things underneath." Lottie looked at him. "You're describing a servant." "I'm describing a specific kind of awareness," he said, "which happens to currently exist in someone who spent 7 years learning to read this hall while everyone assumed she was invisible. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of a space where something was being carefully placed. "This is not a small offer," he said. "The position carries a formal status within the household. Its own quarters, a place at the inner table during gatherings, authority to move freely through all sections of the castle." He paused. "And it would mean leaving behind the life you have had here as a servant." "Completely." Lottie looked at the bare trellis in front of them. In a few weeks it would be covered in climbing roses. She had tended that trellis for 3 years running, cutting back the dead growth each winter, tying the new canes in spring. She had done it as part of her morning duties, and no one had ever asked her name while she did it. "Why me?" she said, honestly. Not the answer about the crossbow. Sebastian considered for a moment. Because you stepped in front of me in a room full of people who were paid to protect me, and none of them moved first. And when I looked at you afterward, you were not frightened and you were not performing bravery. You were simply assessing whether the situation was resolved. He paused. I have met very few people who respond to danger that way. It is not something that can be trained into a person. It is either there or it is not. And the real reason, she said. Something moved at the edge of his expression. Almost imperceptible. Almost. I noticed you 3 months ago, he said. During the winter supply inspection, you were arguing with the head cook about the quality of the grain delivery. You had a full tray in one hand and a written inventory list in the other. And you were correct about the grain, and the cook knew it, and you knew that he knew it. And you held your position without raising your voice. Lottie stared at him. You were at the winter supply inspection. I walk the castle every few weeks without announcement, he said. I find it useful. He looked at her. I walked past the kitchen corridor and heard someone who knew exactly what she was talking about and refused to be told otherwise. She looked away for a moment, toward the trellis, processing this. I want to give you time to consider, he said. This is not a decision that should be made quickly. You should speak with whoever you trust. You should think about what you want. A pause. But I hope you'll say yes. That last sentence was different from the rest. Slightly. In the same way that a single different thread in a piece of fabric changes the way the light falls across it. Lottie looked at him. I'll give you my answer by tomorrow morning, she said. He nodded once. That was all. She stood to leave. At the archway, she stopped, because something needed to be said. Last night, she said, without turning around fully. When I stepped in front of you, I want you to know it wasn't because of anything except the sound. I didn't know who you were at that point. I know, he said. I want to make sure that's clear. It is, he said. It's one of the reasons I'm asking. She went back through the archway into the corridor, and behind her, the east courtyard was quiet and pale in the morning light, and the bare trellis stood waiting for the season to change. Petra cried, not immediately. She listened to everything first, sitting on the edge of her cot in the small room behind the kitchens with her hands folded in her lap, her rust-colored hair loose around her shoulders, her face doing the careful work of a woman absorbing information before she allows herself to feel it. Lottie told her everything from the beginning. The corridor, Dane in the courtyard, the east courtyard conversation, the offer, all of it. When Lottie finished, Petra was quiet for a long moment. Then she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and her eyes went bright, and she looked at the ceiling the way people look at ceilings when they are trying to keep something from falling down their face. Don't, Lottie said. I'm not, Petra said, in the voice of someone who absolutely was. Petra. I made that dress, Petra said, and then the tears came, swift and quiet. And she wiped them away with the efficiency of a woman who had practiced crying without making it anyone else's problem. I made that dress for you to wear to a stupid banquet for a stupid man who didn't deserve you, and instead you wore it the night you saved the Alpha King and got offered a position in the inner household. She wiped her face again. That is the best dress I have ever made. Lottie sat beside her on the cot and put her arm around her shoulders, and they stayed like that for a while, in the small room that smelled of stone and candle tallow and the faint lavender Petra kept in a sachet under her pillow. Come with me, Lottie said. Petra pulled back to look at her. What? I'm not accepting a position that puts me on the other side of the castle from you, Lottie said. I'll ask if there's a place for you. If there isn't, I'll find a way to make one. Petra stared at her for a moment. Then she laughed, short and watery. You haven't even said yes yet. I'm saying yes, Lottie said. I decided in the courtyard. I just needed to tell you first." Petra pulled her into a hug that was tighter than her small frame suggested possible. Lottie held on. She gave Sebastian her answer the following morning, in the east courtyard, at the same hour as the day before. He was standing near the trellis again. She thought that might simply be where he stood when he was thinking. "Yes," she said. "With one condition." He raised an eyebrow slightly. It was the most visibly surprised she had seen him. "Petra comes with me," Lottie said. "She is the most competent person in this castle's service, and she has been treated as invisible for 8 years. I want her placed in a proper household position, not a courtesy, a real one." Sebastian looked at her for a moment. The woman with the rust-colored hair. "She manages the linen inventory and has been correcting the head housekeeper's records without credit for at least 4 years. Lottie stared at him. "You know who she is." "I told you. I walk the castle." "Then you already know she's worth keeping." "I do," he said. "It's done." He said it simply, the way he said most things, as though the decision had already been made, and the words were simply confirming it. She was learning that this was not arrogance. It was the particular efficiency of a man who knew his own mind clearly and did not perform deliberation he had already completed. "Then yes," she said, formally and completely. "Yes." The transition took 4 days. Lottie and Petra moved from the servants' quarters behind the kitchens to the inner east wing, where the household staff of the formal residence were housed. Their rooms were not large, but they had windows that opened onto the rose courtyard, and the windows had actual glass, which Petra stood in front of for a full minute without saying anything when she first saw them. Lottie's new position had no tidy title. Sebastian called it the inner hall position when speaking to others, and the lean man with sharp features, whose name she learned was Kalin, and who functioned as Sebastian's chief advisor, gave her a briefing on the first morning that lasted 2 hours and covered everything from the layout of all internal chambers, to the protocols for formal gatherings, to the specific vulnerabilities in the current security rotation that she was now partly responsible for addressing. She asked questions. Kalin answered them with the focused precision of a man who respected questions asked well. On the 3rd day, Kalin paused in the middle of explaining the Northern Corridor watch schedule and looked at her with an expression that was as close to warmth as his face appeared to manage. "You're faster than the last 3 people who held this position combined," he said. "I want you to know that's not a small thing." "What happened to the last 3?" she asked. 2 retired. 1 decided the responsibility was larger than he wanted. A pause. "None of them lasted past the 1st month." "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you should know what you're walking into," he said. "And because I think you won't have the same problem." On the 4th day, Corvin Ashdale requested a private audience with the Alpha King. Lottie learned of it from Dane, who appeared in the doorway of the inner hall briefing room where she was reviewing the gathering security records with the expression of a man delivering news he found personally enjoyable. "Ashdale is in the outer waiting room," he said. "He's been there since early morning. Sebastian isn't seeing him until after the midday hour." Lottie kept her eyes on the records. "That has nothing to do with me. He asked one of the door guards whether you were still in the castle," Dane said. She looked up. "He was told that you hold a position in the inner household," Dane said. "I may have been nearby when that information was conveyed." A pause. He went quite still when he heard it. Lottie set down the record she was holding. "Dane." "Yes?" "Go away." "Absolutely," he said, and left with the unhurried satisfaction of a man who had accomplished exactly what he came to accomplish. She did not see Corvin. She did not seek him out, and he was not brought to any part of the castle where she was working. Whatever he said to Sebastian in that meeting, she was not told, and she did not ask. Some doors, once closed, do not need to be reopened to confirm that what was behind them is gone. What she knew was this. He left Veldmore that afternoon with his new bride and his pack alliance and his amber necklace promise. And when he rode out through the main gate, she was standing at the window of the inner hall, reviewing the evening watch rotation, and she watched the horses go without feeling very much at all, which was its own kind of answer. 6 weeks later, the climbing roses came in on the east courtyard trellis. Lottie was crossing the courtyard on her way to the morning briefing when she stopped and looked at them. The new canes covered in small tight buds just beginning to open, pale pink against the old stone wall. She had tended that trellis for 3 years. She had cut back the dead growth and tied the new canes and done it all as part of morning duties while no one asked her name. She was still looking at them when Sebastian came through the archway from the opposite direction. He stopped when he saw her. Then he looked at the trellis. "You tended this," he said. It was not a question. "For 3 years," she said. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "It's the best one on the castle grounds." "I know," she said. "I chose the variety myself. The head gardener told me the rootstock was too old to produce well. I disagreed." The corner of his mouth moved. It was a small movement. She had learned in 6 weeks that his expressions were like that. Precise and economic, which meant they carried more weight than larger ones did on other people. "You disagreed," he said. "I was right," she said. He looked at her with that particular quality of attention that she had felt the first night in the corridor, and had been slowly understanding ever since. It was not the look of someone observing from a distance. It was the look of someone who had decided that the distance was no longer necessary. "Walk with me," he said. It was the first time he had said it. Those words in that configuration. Not a request for a briefing or a meeting with Kaylin or a review of the security rotation. Simply, "Walk with me." The way one person says it to another when the purpose is the walking itself. She fell into step beside him. They walked the inner courtyard path, past the trellis and the old stone bench and the archway that led to the corridor where everything had begun 6 weeks ago. The morning was clear and cool, and the castle was beginning to wake around them. Distant voices, the smell of bread from the kitchens, a horse somewhere in the outer yard. They did not talk about work. They talked about small things, the variety of rose she had chosen and why, a book Kaylin had left in the briefing room that she had read half of without meaning to, a particular stubborn section of the Northern Watch schedule that neither of them had resolved yet. It was the kind of conversation that sounds like nothing and contains everything. When they reached the far end of the courtyard path, Sebastian stopped and turned to face her, and the morning light was full and even on both of them. "I want you to know something," he said. "All right. What exists between us now?" he said carefully. In the way he did everything carefully. "I want it to grow honestly, without pressure and without pretense. You came into this position because you earned it, and for no other reason. Whatever comes after that is a separate thing, and it belongs to you to decide." Lottie looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." He held her gaze, that small movement at the corner of his mouth again. They walked back together through the archway, into the corridor, into the daily work of the castle, and the life she had built inside it. And behind them, the roses on the trellis opened fully in the morning sun, pale pink against stone that had stood for centuries, tended carefully and finally blooming in the right season. Petra was promoted to head of household linen and interior records before the summer. She cried about that too, but briefly, and then immediately began reorganizing 4 years of filing errors with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting a very long time to do exactly this. Kaylin declared her the most useful person in the inner household within 3 weeks, which was the highest compliment his vocabulary appeared to contain. Dane continued to appear in doorways with information no one had asked him for, and nobody made any serious effort to stop him, because his information was always accurate and occasionally saved considerable time. The 4 men from the gathering were questioned fully, and the trail they left behind was followed carefully and quietly over the following months, leading to a minor lord 2 regions north who had mistaken Sebastian's patience for weakness. That mistake was corrected. Sebastian handled it without ceremony and without cruelty, which Lottie came to understand was his manner with most things that required handling. And Lottie Vane, who had walked into the great hall of Veldmore 6 weeks earlier, carrying a handmade dress and a promise someone else had broken, walked through those same halls now with her head up and her name known, and her place no longer something she had to earn every morning by making herself small enough to be tolerated. She had been seen by the wrong eyes for a long time. The right ones had found her in a service corridor on a rainy night, and neither of them had looked away since.